magic. Darkness looms, a figure rises from ancient tomb. With a heart of ice and eyes of red, the Lich Lord walks among the dead. Akantos simmered, power-hungry cold. Vecna's sword, secrets untold. Through dark rites and arcane lore, he became what none had before. The relics of dread, symbols of a power long fled in shadows deep. His whispers sway, the Lich Lord's cursed words none can say. Cast the betrayer with a blade of might, turned against Vecna in the dead of night. Severed hand and eye, a bloody end. Yet Vecna's spirit none could bend. Vecna! Now a god of secrets, dark and vast, Vecna's shadow forever cast. In hidden cults, his name endures, the Lich Lord's power ever lures. Vecna!
Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to take a look at Eve of Ruin. I don't want to ruin your fun and your surprises, but I am going to show you a little bit about the Fantasy Grounds integration of it and also talk about some tips on incorporating. So essentially this is a high-level adventure. It's like 12 to level 20. So one of the things I found out is that it kind of spreads across a bunch of different places and locations throughout D&D's history, which I think is part of their MO for this particular release. The other thing is that there isn't too many high-level adventures out there. So if you have an adventure that you're wrapping up, maybe it's set in the Forgotten Realms, or maybe it's set in one of the other realms that this place touches on, such as Eberron, Spelljammer, Dragonlance. Any of those settings might work too. This also helps you utilize older content. So if you've invested a lot into Fantasy Grounds in the 5e rule set, this gives you an opportunity to kind of use some of those assets that you had owned before, which I think is important because you spend a lot of money. A lot of us just collect. We hardly ever get to play. And by having these extras that have some sort of tie-in value, it lessens the work for the GM, and it gives you more resources to work with. So you may not use that stuff, but at least you have it there in case. And it's nice to be able to revisit some of that content if you need to. If you're going to prep for your games, or perhaps you want to link some adventures together, or whatever it may be. So most of the adventures, you'll notice, start on the Sword Coast. So in this case, for Eve of Ruin, it definitely starts in Neverwinter. But you don't have to do it there, but I think it's a good central hub for running a campaign in the Forgotten Realms. A lot of different resources, video games, lore, all kinds of stuff take place in there. So if you're gonna um, run adventures in the Forgotten Realms, I definitely think about either Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter or Waterdeep, one of those main 3 cities. And then if you want to invest any more, if you haven't already, I think the Sword Coast Adventures Guide is a good go-to resource if you're going to do anything in the Forgotten Realms. It kind of has some additional lore, some more maps, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the core books. You don't have to have those. At least the Player's Handbook is probably the most sought after and needed. The other stuff is kind of additional. A Monster Manual would be my second choice, and then the DM's Guide would be my third. And then fourth, it would be the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. All this other stuff here is for building characters. So Mordenkainen's, Tasha's, Xanathar's, all those additional books would be more for building characters and leveling up. So if you're not needing to do that, you already have pre-gens, you're only going to run a one-shot, then you won't need all that. You might just want the Player's Handbook for reference and for parsing of spells and such that you get out of the characters. But other than that, I mean, I think the bare minimum here would be the adventure and the Player's Handbook. I would recommend those 2 books if you're going to dive into Eve of Ruin. Now, some of the things that I had considered was using existing content to start the adventure. Since this starts off at, after level 10, you could do it like after Storm Kings of Thunder or Lost Mine of Phandelver or Phandelver Below, because those will get you close to the level requirements for level 10. So those might be a good way to start off. And I think the Baldur's Gate content might kind of lend itself to it as well. But a lot of this centers around Neverwinter. And when you start off an adventure such as Lost Mine of Phandelver, you start Neverwinter. And that's a location that is commonly referenced in a lot of different materials. The other thing I thought about is you could just run a lot of homebrewed stuff, and you can even make cameos from the people or the characters from Honor Among Thieves. So maybe not so much as making them a mainstay in your campaign, but you could use some of those iconic NPCs to mention the growing concern and threat of Vecna, the cult of Vecna. So you can use little things like that to kind of build the immersion and kind of make your world a little bit more cohesive, especially if you adventure in the Forgotten Realms and related content. The other thing is there's a lot of iconic locations and NPCs in this. So you could also add your own, such as Szass Tam, Valindra Shadowmantle. You can do, have locations like Gauntlgrym or the Black Staffs in Waterdeep or the Arcane Brotherhood or the Red Wizards of Thay. Anything like that would probably have an interest in this at some point and in some form. And also, like if you're a faction, like for the Harpers, anything like that kind of makes sense in regards to this adventure and how much it encompasses. So kind of the sky's the limit on this. I mean, you can kind of start from anywhere, but eventually you're going to want to get up to about a level 11 is what they suggest, maybe 12 when you start the actual adventure. There is an add-on adventure that came with people who pre-ordered, and that is exclusively on, I believe, the DM's Guild and Roll20. I don't know if Fantasy Grounds has the permission to publish it, but there are other resources on the DM's Guild that you can use for, let's say, Neverwinter. I have this companion guide to Neverwinter, which is nice to have if you're going to run a lot of your adventures within that particular area. This is not a Fantasy Grounds module, but it wouldn't take very much to put this information into your campaign. There's this thing here. It's a level 5 through 6 level adventure. It's in Neverwinter. So like I said, if you're going to do homebrew stuff, there's definitely a lot of material to draw upon. There's not really no end to this. There's just tons of information, tons of different things with maps and all kinds of cool stuff. So there isn't a shortage on content, but there may be a shortage on time in putting this stuff into Fantasy Grounds, because not everything has been adapted to Fantasy Grounds. And if you've been on the DM's Guild the last year or so, there hasn't been a lot of focus on Fantasy Grounds. I think Roll20 is kind of crowding it out, so there is still a lot of good content on the DM's Guild, especially like adventures and stuff, but a lot of the Fantasy Grounds stuff is slowly moving over to the Fantasy Grounds Forge. However, the adventures, being that they're set in the Forgotten Realms and that sort of thing, they have to remain on the DM's Guild. There are a few products that I had found that were related somewhat. This is a Grim Press product. It's called Vecna's Book of Vile Darkness. I thought this might be a good adventure module to have if you're going to run this particular adventure. It's got subclasses, there's some lineages, a bunch of feats, 6 different vassals of Vecna, and there's a bunch of maps and spells and magic items and all kinds of stuff. So this might be helpful for the Eve of Ruin campaign. So you may not use all of it, but you use little pieces of it and to use it to kind of run if you're going to do like homebrew stuff that's set in this particular setting or that you want to work up to. The other thing is that sometimes the content might be leaving or lacking in certain areas. It's kind of your job or your duty to kind of bridge the gap between these different adventures to lead up to something like this, because this is a pretty high level game and it includes some very iconic NPCs, like Mordenkainen and Tasha. I mean, you get to basically meet up with them at some point and adventure with them. So it's a kind of a big deal in regards to the Forgotten Realms and DnD5e rule set, and anyone who's invested over the last 10 years. So this is kind of like a culmination of all that content put together. So it kind of touches on a lot of different things. Because you have Ravenloft, Dragonlance, Spelljammer, Planescape. I mean, it goes all across this. And if you have those settings, you might be able to take some of that content from there and use it in your campaign to build up to the proper levels. Or if you want to just start off playing this adventure, you could just create high-level characters, run the intro adventure, and just adjust the levels, and then go right into the adventure. So you don't have to spend months and years, developing characters. Although it'd be a little bit more immersive, and your backstories would be built up, and your players would probably be familiar with each other. So you have that advantage if you're gonna go that route. But it looks like it's laid out pretty well. I mean, this is your standard thing. So if you're new to Fantasy Grounds or you haven't been using it for a long time, if you go into modules area, you'll see where I have these things loaded. So this is where you want to load your rule books first, and then once they're loaded, any type of book that you have in this modules area, you don't have to go to this section anymore. You can actually go to books, which is essentially like your bookshelf, and then anything that has a reference manual is going to show here. So it's kind of like a bookshelf, and you take a book off the shelf. So for instance, like the Player's Handbook, this goes straight to the reference manual. If you wanted to go to like the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, it goes straight to the reference manual. So this kind of helps reduce the number of clicks and digging around and trying to find where things are. This kind of helps a little bit. This focuses your campaign books, the stuff that you have loaded for your adventures. Even if you make your own, you start here. This is kind of a newer feature of Fantasy Grounds. I think they've done a pretty good job with. I mean, sure, there's a few things that may need fixing or addressed, but in all, it's pretty cool. So this is a very high-level adventure. It may take you several months to go through this because you're visiting different classic settings and classic areas that have been covered in previous content. And that's why I was saying earlier that if you have these settings like the Death House, or perhaps you have some Neverwinter content from 4th edition laying around, you can bring that stuff in and help you embellish and add to whatever you're doing in your own campaign. So this is going to help you revisit and reuse some of your older assets. It's also going to allow your players and for you to read about some of the iconic NPCs and villains that have appeared throughout the history of this campaign settings for the 5th edition rule set. So I guess it's kind of like a an opus kind of thing for this setting. I don't say it's the end, but I do have a feeling that after the, the I don't remember what the adventure stairways or what are paths of stairways of the realms or whatever. Once that's done, I hope that the newer rule set kind of starts changing, going into different direction, because this is kind of getting, I think it gets kind of played out after a while. But I do like the nostalgia of it, and I do like the idea that you get to battle and fight alongside some of these iconic villains and NPCs that you've seen throughout all the different products. So that's pretty good. Um, like I said, you have for Ravenloft, Eberron, Spelljammer, Dragonlance, Greyhawk, Planescape. So all these different settings might be good. Isn't a whole lot on Greyhawk in 5th edition or Fantasy Grounds, but I'm sure you can find material, and there's a lot of really cool communities and resources out there that provide things for Greyhawk, such as Lord Gasumba, also Anna Meyer's maps. I mean, there's a whole thing with those guys. So if you're into Greyhawk and kind of the old school OSR type stuff, they have a lot of content. So you could probably adapt some of that into Fantasy Grounds. So at the end of the video, I'll have my affiliate link going to this adventure for Fantasy Grounds. It's already out now. And then there's a DM's Guild filter here for the Vecna's Vile Book of Darkness. That's a Grim Press product, but again, it's just kind of something you might want to add into your existing campaign if you're going to run this adventure. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but it's definitely a high-level adventure. It has its merits. There's probably some people out there pissed off that some of the canon storylines and stuff don't line up, but I think that all in all, it would be fun to run if you've ran some of the other adventures and you haven't played in a while, or perhaps you got to a point where there just wasn't enough content. I think this would be a good way to pick up those older adventures that you've ran over the last 10 years and run this as kind of like your finale for whatever part of your group or campaign you're in. So I think it gives you that closure that you'd be looking for once your players get up to be around 10th level. And you'll notice that there's not a ton of content out there. I mean, they're trying to add more stuff, but it's just not easily ran or playable once you get past a certain level. Your GM has to be kind of experienced to kind of make that challenging still. Because what you'll see is, like, when you first start off at tier 1, all your rolls are really difficult to make. And I think the best adventuring really happens in most cases, not always, but levels 4 through about 8 is probably the best adventuring you're going to get, because the rolls are going to be more balanced. It's not going to be as one-sided, and your chances of success kind of increase as you level up, but the difficulty also goes up. But once you get past like 12th level or something like that, it's almost like everything is gonna pass, except for if you roll a 1 or something like that, or if there's penalties. So when you get past a certain level, rolling almost seems ridiculous in regards to a range of opportunities there. It's almost like pass or fail at that point. And that's kind of what it's like at first level. You go to the other extreme. When you're rolling, it's like everything fails just about. Everything's too difficult. And then when you get to the other end of it, it's like everything succeeds, or the challenge is you have to roll a 20 regardless, that sort of thing, because it gets to the point where the dice rolls get to be kind of annoying, and they don't really have much meaning at lower levels or at higher levels. But when you're playing in the intermediate stuff, it's kind of a really good mix of both. And I think that's one of the failures of this particular rule set, is that the dice range is kind of messed up, I think. And then doing a high level adventure like this could be kind of challenging, and I want to say a little bit boring for high level characters if you don't present them with challenges. And a lot of the things I would consider a challenge isn't necessarily a big combat, but a role playing challenge, puzzles, having to get to talk to these different people and go to all these different locations. I think exploration is probably one of the weakest points of D&D, and this would be a good time to pull that out because navigation, resources, and the ability to to go between these settings is probably a bigger deal than it would be in a lower level setting where you might get one jump from one place to another, like a portal or something like that. So you start off in Neverwinter. There's a death cult, and you essentially have to investigate this death cult, or it's a cult of Vecna, essentially, and that's where this thing starts off. I looked at the D&D Beyond integration for this book of, for the actual adventure for, um, running this pre-adventure that they put out for the up for this Vecna. It's okay. I mean, there's about 20 pages. There's one map. There's like 2 or 3 pieces of art. It wouldn't take too much to enter that into Fantasy Grounds. I'm just kind of warning you that unless you're familiar with it, it might be a little bit time consuming depending on how you attack it. But entering the adventure into Fantasy Grounds from the, like, if you have a D&D Beyond account, it wouldn't take too long. I mean, I looked at it, and if someone from myself that has a little bit of experience with that, probably take me a few hours to fully adapt it. I mean, that's putting the map in, doing line of sight, and putting in all the chapters. That's probably my best guess, is between 3 to 4 hours of work. If you're really efficient, you know what you're doing, and you don't, you copy and paste really fast and that sort of thing, it might take you about 3 hours. So I think it might be worth it if you're going to start off new and kind of build up your campaign in Neverwinter. So the prequel adventure is only available on Roll20 and on the DM's Guild, but and D&D Beyond. But if you really wanted to use that adventure, you could probably adapt it to Fantasy Grounds fairly easily. It's not super complex. There's only like a dozen creatures. There's a player's map. There's a DM's map, which you only really need the player's map in Fantasy Grounds. There's a couple tables, and then just a couple pieces of art. It's not that bad in regards to conversion. But if you're not familiar with Fantasy Grounds, or you're not sure how that works, I mean, it might be a little challenging. But you can also run it straight from your tablet or from your D&D Beyond app. So you don't necessarily have to have all the assets in Fantasy Grounds. You can kind of wing it and just use the resource, and then just use the story out of it, kind of like you would around a table. You don't necessarily have to have everything put into Fantasy Grounds. It'd be nice to have the map at least, and then everything else you can just wing it, just read or use that as your guide. I think the map and the images would probably be about the only thing you absolutely would want to put in Fantasy Grounds, especially around a table. And if you got a big TV, you can put the map or the images out there. But other than that, you wouldn't have to do too much extra work if you want to do it that way. So Fantasy Grounds supports being able to play online, but also face-to-face. So you can use this as a library. You don't necessarily have to have people connected, and you can have a second screen and project that onto a TV. I think if I was at a convention, I would want to have a big screen projector and use Fantasy Grounds as kind of where, instead of carrying all my books around, I just use that to kind of put everything in there, throw up a couple maps, and then just use real dice, and maybe have a hard copy or two of the player's handbook around the table, and some dice, of course. So that would be a good way to incorporate Fantasy Grounds face-to-face. You could also do a hybrid mode, which is a little bit more complex, but I think it can work if you have everything set up properly. You kind of get into networking and, who has access to the camera and, all that kind of stuff, but it really does have that ability. And the nice thing about it is you don't have to have internet, which for face-to-face play. So you could take a laptop and a couple batteries up camping, pre-print your character sheets, and run that sucker around a table with some real dice. I mean, that's really cool. You don't have to necessarily be online. And I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of stuck around with Fantasy Grounds, because I wanted to be able to access my content regardless if I have internet or not. I mean, internet is kind of a standard now, I guess. But when it's required to get to your materials, I don't care for that too much. I guess I'm old school in that regard. Let's see. So, yeah, so you can use existing campaigns to transition into this large, high level adventure. Like you start off with one of the other starter sets or one of the other campaign settings, because generally those don't go past 10th level in most cases. Or you can create a series of one shots and side quests and little like adventures within Neverwinter or somewhere around there, so that you can kind of do your own thing, use your previous assets, use stuff from the DM's Guild and all that stuff, and kind of incorporate that and do it that way. So you don't necessarily have to run any specific adventure. It takes a little bit more work and a little bit more experience, but and a little bit more know-how in Fantasy Grounds. But I think that's a lot more rewarding in a lot of cases when you're using that. Like I was saying earlier, I think a cameo by one of the characters from Honor Among Thieves would be kind of cool. I don't think you have to do very much of that. It just maybe one of the NPCs might be familiar, and someone say, "Oh yeah, I remember that from the movie" or something like that. That's all you really want from her. You don't want it to make it a whole thing about it. Maybe just have one of the NPCs give you information or something like that. You can also bring in major figures from other settings to kind of help later on. So maybe you made some allies or enemies from the other campaign settings. I think having those show up occasionally in your higher level campaigns kind of has that continuity and the immersion that you might be looking for. So that's a kind of a cool thing to do. And I think that's why I like this adventure, because it gives me a chance to go back to those other resources and pull stuff from there if I need it. And I think that's a huge selling point for me for any campaign, any rule set, is having the ability or at least the chance to use that stuff, because sometimes when you run an adventure, you don't do anything else with it after that. It's kind of like goes back on the shelf. This is a way to kind of dig through your existing content, your resources, your assets, and utilize those to kind of culminate up into an adventure like this. And it doesn't have to be this adventure, really. You can do whatever you want, but I think this really has a lot of potential for running it as a high level kind of tie-in campaign that kind of culminates everything together. And I think what would be really cool is if you had two different tables going with different people, that during this adventure you take all of the people that play the most, or the people that are more attending your sessions the most, and let them run through this together. So you might have one group that went through Phandelver and another group that went through the Dragon Heist, and then they kind of come together in this adventure. And so it gives you a chance to bring those people together in a new campaign. So if you've wrapped up two other previous sessions and you want to invite the top 2 or 3 people out of those tables that you think would be a good fit, I mean, this would be a good time to do that. And I think this is an important aspect of any role-playing game and rule set, is the ability to bring people together and the ability to use your assets. And that's kind of an important thing about this hobby. Fantasy Grounds really just facilitates this. I think it does a good job with allowing you to store information and to present it. It doesn't always have all the ifs, ands, and buts, and I think that's true of any virtual tabletop, but it does a pretty good job of it. I think, honestly, I think 65% is a good number. So it does 65% of just about everything. So that goes from rolling dice to automation to having the graphics and the maps. I think 65 is a conservative, good number overall. Some a little less, some a little more. But if you have half or more of your content already set up for you, that really helps a lot. It cuts down on prep time. It cuts down on cost a little bit because you already have everything in the adventure. And it really cuts down on frustration when it comes to, I think my biggest stumbling block is trying to make stuff up as I go. There's days where I can just do it and it's not a problem, and there's days I just can't think of anything. And this type of approach to creating content for virtual tabletop use is pretty decent, and you don't need a ton of extensions, a ton of tokens, and all that kind of stuff. You really don't. That just kind of comes with time. With people that are collecting, like myself, I've got a ridiculous amount of stuff, and I really have to spend probably a weekend going through all my folders and all my assets and getting rid of stuff and moving stuff around, because I honestly am kind of embarrassed. I preach, hey, don't have all these books loaded and make these maps only this size, and I'm probably the worst one. I have tons of crap, and it really does affect the performance of Fantasy Grounds, but it also adds to confusion. Like, yeah, this map is over here, but then I got another copy of it in this other folder. It gets to the point where you get oversaturated, you get overwhelmed, and you start noticing a performance hit with any virtual tabletop, to be honest. Once you load up 50 extensions and you got like 70 books open, and just it gets to be the point where it gets to be ridiculous, and I'm probably the worst one for that. So if you're like me, spend that weekend going through your stuff if you got time and get it sorted out. I got to do that, and I keep saying, I got to do it. I got to spend a weekend on it, and I never do, because I either get distracted or I got some family stuff going on, or I want to make content. I don't want to go back necessarily and organize, but I do have a point where you have to do it, and I'm getting to that point. But anyways, for the Eve of Ruin, I think overall, if I had to go from a 1 to 10, just off the initial appearance of it, how it's laid out, value, and all that stuff, I think I'd give it like a 6.5. I think that's just without reading through the entire thing. It's not bad. I don't think it's a horrible adventure. I do like the idea that it's high level and that pretty much everything's done for you. So I want to go into some of the images, just like a map. Let's take a look at the maps. So I'm going to go into images, and when you're in Fantasy Grounds, you have all these different books loaded. That's going to show over here on the right, and that can be a little bit confusing and daunting if you've never used the platform. But if you use the group filter, and you come down here and use this drop down, I'm going to click on Vecna, Eve of Ruin. So that filters out, the rest of the stuff I don't need to look at. And then I might want to look at some of the maps that are in here. Now this has quite a few images. This is set up as 1 through 6 for the pages. So that's a lot of different images. So it's got quite a bit of art and images in this particular adventure. So that is a big adventure. I mean, you normally don't have this many images in one campaign, so this is pretty big. Let's take a look at some of this. Yeah, some of these are repeated images from other content, so I want to say that depending on how the adventure is written and the way they set it up in Fantasy Grounds, this may or may not have been necessary, but the way they change this in how they do these adventures may have to include those repetitive images so that they show up properly in the campaign. I know there was a time where you used to be able to link this stuff together, and you wouldn't have to have extra copies of different types of images, such as these NPC images. So there could be a reason for that. But nonetheless, here's the Never Death Catacombs. So I'm just going to show a little bit. This is the map. Unfortunately, we do have I say unfortunately because I prefer to have color, but this is the Catacombs map that comes with the adventure. I don't know why they keep going with this black and white thing. I don't mind it. I like Dice and Logos maps, but not every book. I mean, it's getting to the point where almost every single book has a black and white map, and it's kind of nostalgic, kind of OSR-ish, but if you're going to be playing on a virtual tabletop, I think it's kind of defeating or whatever. So you could take and use Fantasy Grounds to recolor this, so you don't have to be stuck with, if you want to actually put more assets in here, you can actually use different colors and tiles. So you could spend the time if you want to make the maps look nicer. But personally, I would have preferred to have color maps, especially in an iconic adventure like this. But that's just my personal opinion. You don't have to have that. This will work. I mean, if you want to do it this way. But I think this would be nice if they had both. Like if you wanted the old school way and then a recolored version at least. But I don't know if the author or the artist would want that. So Dyson Logo does this cross hatch and black and white. I do like his maps, but I don't know. I get tired of the same old thing. Just about every adventure has that. So, anyways, that's just a little gripe of mine. But this is just a thing. Oh, this is a big battle map for Pandemonium. This is probably one of the cliche top battles that goes on. So this is kind of interesting. So they give you this huge kind of image to give you that immersion of like where this takes place. But then the actual battle map is right here. And honestly, I don't know let's see how they did this in Fantasy Ground. So I'm going to unlock the image. Yeah, so they just did it around here, which makes sense. They use the just this area, and this is your battle map. And I think this would work well with a quick map too. So if you have these assets, maybe you have your own pictures of these or something, you kind of build your own thing. But yeah, I'm not entirely impressed with the maps that come from Wizards of the Coast anyways. If you look at stuff like Pathfinder 2 and any other rule set, they do a really good job on the maps. I think I like Paizo's maps. They're really cool. They're a little bit more digital and they have a little bit more compatibility with virtual tabletops. Yeah, not too pleased about the quality of the images here. This works great around a table or if you print out a map, or something like that. But for virtual tabletop implementation, I don't like what Wizards of the Coast provides. I mean, Fantasy Grounds can only adapt what they're given. They're not going to create a whole new map for the adventures unless they have license to do so or they have incentive to do so. So this is kind of up to us. If you want something nicer or something bigger or smaller, you're going to have to do your own thing. I think I would probably do my own thing in this case. There isn't much here. I'd probably just do some tiles, landscape tiles. And then I'd find some assets that would kind of match these. I mean, you can use a generative AI tool if you had to. But this is I don't know. I think it's kind of disappointing. I think they could have done a lot more with the images. But that's the style they kind of went for, is this aesthetic of having the scroll type looking art. So this is a design choice, but I think, honestly, I think it's more to do with cost than anything else. But who knows? Anyhow, there's my gripes and rants about how things are in these books. But Mordenkainen at work. Oh, cool. So yeah, you get to see Mordenkainen, or at least what you think is Mordenkainen, and then there's a lot of other iconic characters. Oh, the Rod of Seven Parts. There we go. So this is kind of cool. So I guess you're going to go across the universe, piece this thing together to help you in your quest. The pre-adventure that's available on D&D Beyond is for levels 3 and 4, I believe. And it essentially just kind of gets you into Neverwinter. You're asked to patrol the city. You find one of the dead nobles, and you end up researching that and stumbling across clashing with the I guess a faction of Vecna's worshippers or his cult. So that's kind of how that works. And then the first chapter in Eve of Ruin also goes through that as well. So I was kind of looking for a way to adapt those two things together. It's fairly seamless. Neverwinter, Daggalt Neverwinter, the ruler of Neverwinter, kind of starts paying attention to you because you helped him with that previous, with the first adventure, and then you can just go right into Eve of Ruin, or wait a while, of course, get your levels up. The other thing you could do is play that intro adventure with third level characters, see how everything goes, and use that as kind of like your testing field to see which players and which, how the chemistry is, and then use that as kind of like your staging area for future adventures. And then you could say, okay, now we're going to level up to level 10 or something like that. So anyone who sticks around for that first, the adventure was written for like 3 to 4 hours. So anyone who can make it through that and the character creation process, I think they're in. If they don't show up during a lot of those, the one shot, or they don't make it, I wouldn't consider them as in the campaign. I mean, it'd have to be a pretty good excuse for me to not play something fun. I mean, a lot of people don't have time for the hobby, but if you're going to sign up to do it, then then do it. But anyway, so yeah, I'd use the prequel adventure as a way to kind of combine resources, and then also a way to make this more immersive. So I wanted to show you what that venture looks like, and I don't think it would take very much to put this into Fantasy Grounds. So this is the special kind of prequel adventure. There's a piece of art. You have this text here, tells you how this thing goes and how you can incorporate it into Neverwinter. And then you go into the catacombs, and look at the map for this. I mean, why couldn't they do this for the main adventure? This is cool. I mean, this is what I would expect. Not this black and white thing every time. But that's the only real map there is. There's a DM map, and then there's a player map. And then here's the adventure itself. So there's like 15 areas, and each one of these areas is, it's not very big. And then you have the conclusion. You have some things that you can hand out at the end. And then you have the credits. I mean, that wouldn't take too long. The biggest piece of work out of this would be to adapt the map. I think that's pretty much, you view the player version, it doesn't have all the locations on it. I don't think this would take very long. The only thing I could say about this is lining up the grid. If you distort this in any way, shape, or form, it may not line up in Fantasy Grounds. So let's see. If I right click and save the image, let's see what format it's in. Yeah, so it's in JPEG. So you might want to convert that over to WebP. So we can do Vecna and then underscore map, or we can do map, Vecna, whatever. But this is the player's map. You can save that onto your hard drive and then try to incorporate it in the Fantasy Grounds. I think that's probably the biggest hurdle that most people have with adapting content, other than making tokens, because that's another time-consuming thing. But this is a nice map. I wish the rest of the maps look like this and not just the black and white ones. But this is the adventure that you get for the if you pre-ordered on D&D Beyond, you get this. And this is going to be available on Roll20 and also in the DM's Guild. Now, they kind of have an exclusive deal. I don't know what the thing is, but it looks like Fantasy Grounds is kind of getting, I wouldn't say forgotten, but kind of pushed out. But if you think about it, Fantasy Grounds was the only virtual tabletop on the DM's Guild for years. So now that one bookshelf has been sold and Roll20 is kind of integrated with it, it kind of makes sense to me. Why would you support, a competitor? So it's kind of getting to the point where, it's time to pull up stakes. If you're in the DM's Guild, or if you're an author there and you have a lot of Fantasy Grounds content, I would start looking at other things, because it's not going to be as lucrative as it was before. I mean, there isn't as much stuff. I mean, the PDFs are fine, but I'm talking about Fantasy Grounds modules and such. It's just kind of collapsing slowly. I think you got maybe the rest of this year, and then once the one D&D comes out, then it's going to be we'll see what happens there. But yeah, interesting stuff. Things have definitely changing. But anyways, that's my take on the Vecna Eve of Ruin, and basically kind of went over like some ideas on how to incorporate older content or homebrew, or you can use this prequel. Yeah, Pathfinder is much better on Fantasy Grounds. Yeah, I agree. It looks way cooler. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm jealous, but I think that Paizo does a really good job with their maps. I mean, if the maps look more like this, I wouldn't complain as much. because this is what I want. I don't want that other crap. Unless it's supposed to be like OSR or, you know, like a classic adventure, then I understand that. But when you have an opportunity to present a product and yeah, it is a good looking map. It's decent. You know, that's what I would expect. And this is the pre-gen, or the, you know, the prequel that someone wrote to go with the even this artwork is cool. This is, I want to say honestly, whoever did this, it did a better job than the actual adventure overall for artwork and such. This is really well put, you know, really well presented, a lot easier to deal with. And yeah, I love the veil over the skull. Me too. I did some generative AI work on this just to see what I'd come up with, and it kind of made this where you have this as the career or the investigator that you stumble across in the adventure, and it kind of did a pretty good job with making the different variation of this, so you could kind of make it your own, add your own things to it. And I even made there's a ritual that you break up here in this area here where you have this kind of like this green area. It took the information, the color, the mood, kind of the vibe of the image. It's not going to make an exact copy. It's not what it's for. But it did take that information and plug it in and really, let me see if I can find that. It looked really top notch. I mean, it was sweet. I was like, wow, this is, well, unfortunately, it's almost better than the original. You know, that sucks when you have to, you know, have to admit that. But I made some stuff, kind of like a guide for myself on the locations and how to, you know, I got my own tables, and here's all the location stuff, and I put all this stuff in so I can kind of adapt it, and also doing research for this. So here's the map itself, and this is what it came up with based on this image. So it did a really good job kind of giving you that kind of vibe. And this image here is the cover, but this is what it gave me for so you don't give away the plot. Maybe you don't want this to be in the image, but this looks pretty decent. I mean, yeah, we could tell it's AI, but you know, for a one shot to hand this out to someone, not bad at all. Same thing with this. This is kind of another variation. So these could be the cult members. This could be the guy that's, you know, basically dead. There's the eye. You can, yeah, you can. That's become kind of a more of a standard now. And what it will give, yeah, for context, exactly. Color, shape, poses, just the vibe. Yeah, you can. You have, I think you still have to have a paid version of it, but you can upload images to give you more. Like this is like, this looks really cool. Like I like this. This is a, you know, like this would be a really cool image to share. Yeah, you just subbed last night. Yeah. So they are rolling out a free version. The difference between that and the paid version now isn't just the access to. It isn't just like the access thing anymore. It's more like the context length and how many times you can do it per hour. So if you sub now, you got a lot more infinite time with it, or I wouldn't say infinite, but you have more time with it before it times out. And I noticed that it's quicker, and that the context menu is way bigger. So before it would crap out after, you know, 2,000 words or whatever, but now you can get some really long stuff. I mean, it just goes crazy. Like I basically fed it a bunch of text and images. Yeah. Yeah, I capped and I was like, fine. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, that's one of the things that you'll come across is that cap. In most cases, it's fine. Now, there was an earlier adventure, this Vecna's dossier. This was a one-shot that was put out earlier, like I want to say earlier this year or maybe last year. It has the stat block for Vecna in here, and I was wondering if this stat block is anything like the actual stat block. So I'll take a look. So this adventure doesn't have Vecna in it per se, just his persona. But when you go into Eve of Ruin Adventure, let's see, game rules, sources. Okay, so I want to find his stat block. Let's see, where's the NPCs at? Here we go. So we want Vecna. Stat block index. Why is that not so obvious? What? I'm kidding. Oh, here we go. Vecna. Okay, so here's a stat block here. I want to see if the dossier, yeah, it kind of matches. So you got Vile, Teleport, and then Vile, Teleport. So they look similar. 14, 16, 18, 22, 24. Yeah, so it looks like they use the same stat block. So that's cool. So this was something that you could run also in addition to, whatever it is that you're doing in your adventure for the Eve of Ruin for Vecna. So this is, let's see, this has to do with the war between him and Koss, which is part of the thing in the adventure. And this talks about the severed eye in the hand too. So this would be a good resource if you're gonna run that adventure. This is the Vecna dossier, so it kind of goes into his, more detailed information about him, which I think is cool. And then you have, let's see, what else do we got here? There was some other adventure, I believe. Let's see, sources. And let's see, there's Bigby's. Oh, there was another adventure, I think a one-shot, that had to do with the Vecna dossier. Because I remember I put it in the adventure or the content, and then I didn't revisit it. Now I'm looking at it again because you might want to use it for the Eve of Ruin. Yeah, there's a additional adventure that was put out that's kind of related to this. So this is the Vecna dossier, but I believe there was like an adventure that was kind of related to this as well. Maybe that is it, but yeah. So these are all there's the adventures. So maybe it's in there. I don't remember. It's been a while, but it had to do with this. So here's that's the nest of the Eldritch Eye, which is the pre-gen thing, or the prequel, I guess. And then that's the Eve of Ruin. But I swear there was like a adventure that went into more into this Vecna storyline. Anyways, I noticed this, all these partner contents. What's amazing about this is that all these different people, or most of them, not all of them, were totally against Wizards of the Coast and stuff, and now here their product is on the web portal. How crazy is that? I mean, good on them to get partnered and get their stuff up there, and, to make money. I guess that's the bottom line. But they made all that hoopla and had this big fight, and it's almost like they just did that for publicity, and they didn't really care that Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast were screwing people over, or maybe it was just a publicity stunt. I don't know. Yeah, clout chase is real for sure. But it's like they went back on their word. And it's not everyone on here, but like I don't know about the Drakenheim stuff, but I know that that MCDM, Kobold Press, and people are associated with the stuff all made their stand in one way or another. They didn't necessarily badmouth them, but they definitely made it seem like they weren't on board with that. And now here their stuff is. So, anyways, I don't want to get into that. That's not what this show is about. But all right. So, anyways, folks, there is my take on the Eve of Ruin. Take it or leave it. I could be wrong. I don't mind being wrong about some of the stuff, but yeah, use it to kind of conclude your other campaigns that you've ran in the past. Use it to have more use for your previous assets and adventures. Yeah, you're trying to learn as much as possible in hopes of making more full content in the future. Oh yeah, The other thing is organization, Dan. If you're going to do this kind of thing, the biggest thing that's going to save you time is process all those images, resize them, make a list of what you want, and do it. If you don't, you're going to be jumping all over the place, and that's what takes the time away from you. So if you get organized and rename all your files and actually put them in folders and stuff, it's going to save you so much time in the long run. Like, it doesn't seem like you like much, as you're going, but if you look at the overall, if you're not jumping between linking images and putting images in and putting line of sight on, if you're doing that one at a time, that's going to take forever. You want to do is get all the images in, put all the line of sight on, so that way you're not jumping around back and forth between different tools and different formatting and different methods of building your assets. And that's where a lot of people kind of fall down, is they don't have a plan. And if you build a way of doing things for Fantasy Grounds, let's say, is going to make life easier on you. And I'm telling you, you're going to save at least 20% of your time. If you're getting get the workflow down day by day. Exactly. It's taken me a while just to get to this point, and I want to say it's not perfect. There's some things I screw up on and stuff, but all in all, I think I saved myself about 25% time, because I'm not dicking around with looking for stuff. And you put one story entry in, then you go to an image and you do the map, then you link it to there. It takes way too long. You kind of need to build your index and then build all your assets, like your tables, your maps, your images, all that stuff. And at the very end, you link everything together. That's the way to do it. If you're trying to do it onesie twosies, that's fine if you're kind of slowly building up a campaign or something. But when it comes to actually doing a conversion or a large project, it doesn't work very well. It's too slow, and it can get discouraging. And you also get confused because you're jumping around. Yeah, items and NPCs is the stuff. Yeah, that stuff is hard. It's not going to go away. It's just really not. And regardless of the rule set or the platform, that stuff is time. I don't like the items. That's probably my biggest thing I do not like. I used to hate NPCs, at least for 5e. Now I don't mind them as much because I found a good workaround using ChatGPT and the import tool. But when it comes to building items, there's like 5 or 6 different types. There's no tools, no shortcuts, nothing. The only way that might be a workaround is to build it all in XML, and I don't know how to do that. I'd have to have a good example, and I'd probably feed it into an AI tool to do it. But yeah, there isn't a good way to do those. Items are probably the worst. Don't don't make a lot of items. Try to use the SRD. That's what I found out, and just reskin it. If you're making a bunch of custom items with artwork, oh my god, that is probably the worst. NPCs are, I have to say, is the second worst. Maps and images third, and then all the rest is pretty simple. Like tables, story entries, those sort of things. Those aren't bad. Also parcels, quests, all those things are a lot easier to do. I usually get the hard stuff done first, like the NPCs and the items and stuff and the maps. That's what I usually go after. That way I don't get burned out. And if you can get through that, the rest of it's a breeze. So it just depends on the type of content and also the how much detail and effort you want to put into it. Yeah, I find all this stuff is just about finding your setup and using it over and over. Yeah, exactly. You have a work campaign for one setting or for one rule set, and you just work in there, and you keep it separated by these drop downs. So like encounters, you use groups, keep everything separate. That way, if you do have multiple content, it's separated out. And then obviously you don't load your module preview in here. So if I'm working in here, you don't load the module in here after you export it. You actually load it in a different session so you can look at it. And it also removes the potential for dependencies. So if you accidentally link something from a source book and you don't have that loaded, that sort of thing. So that's the other thing I'll do is I'll have just the SRD loaded, and then I'll I'll use that as my reference, but I don't link or pull anything out of there unless I make a copy of it. And then at that point, then it becomes part of the adventure, or a part of the content I'm building. But I don't generally drag links from other books because that would say that you need that book in order to use it, and I don't want that. If you're going to do this as a commercial product and you're working for Smiteworks and you're not a contractor or such, you can probably do that. But if you're doing this for yourself and you're building the content, you want it kind of self-contained as much as possible. You can list the references that you use, but you don't want to rely on anything. And that's another lesson you'll learn is you'll start linking NPCs directly from the SRD or directly from the monster manual. Then you find out that you need those books to run it, and on top of that, there's copyright issues. So there's all kinds of crap that you got to think about when you're doing this. But anyways, folks, I'm going to let you go. I've been rambling for over an hour, so take care, folks. Have a good day, and have fun, and hopefully you'll be able to check out Eve of Ruin someday, and that maybe it'll be of value to you. I know a lot of people are kind of gun shy. Yeah, no problem, Dan. But people are a little bit gun shy right now about this 5th edition rule set because it is evolving. It's really hard to be hype and happy about it when a lot of this stuff may or may not be useful in the future. And I think the adventures and stuff will be fine. It's just like the rule books and stuff. That's what I'm more concerned about. Like the player's handbook, that's not going to be the same. You'll probably be able to use all this adventure stuff, no problem. But the actual rules, like the DM's guide and the player's handbook, are the ones I'm more concerned about.